What truly makes a person cross the line? It's a question that kind of lingers, doesn't it, in the quiet moments. We often comfort ourselves, I think, by imagining this really clear boundary between us, the ordinary, the good, and them, the truly bad, the monsters. We think of hardened criminals, maybe tyrants, as somehow fundamentally different. But what about someone you know, your coworker, your neighbor, that seemingly ordinary person who once swore they'd never hurt a soul? Today we're peeling back the layers on something, well, something deeply disturbing but also profoundly important. The reality is, evil isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with, like, a villainous laugh. Sometimes it wears a badge, or a lab coat, or sometimes it just quietly follows orders. In this deep dive, our mission is to journey into the insights of Philip Zimbardo's really pivotal work, The Lucifer Effect. We want to map out that psychological terrain where morality can subtly, almost imperceptibly shift, where personal responsibility can just dissolve. We're really aiming to give you a detailed understanding here, not just a quick summary, of how these insidious transformations can actually happen.
And you've hit the nail on the head there. This isn't just abstract theory for us to dissect from a distance, like some academic puzzle. Zimbardo didn't just study the mechanics of evil, he actually witnessed it. He saw it unfolding in real time, often with startling speed. He didn't just read about it. He went into simulated prisons. He served as an expert witness in real courtrooms. He looked at high-stakes corporate boardrooms, conducted crucial psychology experiments, all to really understand this chilling phenomenon. So our aim today is to explore these settings, the real-world ones, the experimental ones with the depth they deserve. We want to pull out those critical, actionable lessons for you listening right now about how easily even, the best intentions can get corrupted by powerful, often invisible situational forces. It's really about understanding the environment's role, not just pinning it all on the individual.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning, or at least the most famous beginning, the infamous 1971 study. A real landmark, though, controversial moment in social psychology. It was conducted by Philip Zimbardo right there at Stanford University. And the original purpose, well, on the surface, it seemed incredibly benign, almost academic. They just wanted to study the psychological effects of power dynamics in a simulated prison, basically looking at how roles, guard versus prisoner, influenced how people behaved. A fascinating question, really, from a pure research angle.
Exactly. And the setup itself was deceptively simple, almost elegant in a way. Zimbardo and his team that basically transformed the basement of Stanford's psychology department into this makeshift fake prison. Then they recruited 24 male Stanford students, and this is crucial. These weren't troubled individuals. They were screened, psychologically healthy, stable, well-adjusted, mostly middle-class backgrounds. Then, completely randomly, they were assigned roles. 12 became guards, 12 became prisoners, and that random assignment is key. It means any differences in behavior couldn't just be blamed on, pre-existing personalities. But here's the thing that's profoundly important to grasp about this setup and what makes what happened next so chilling. No one was trained, no scripts, no rehearsals. That's a direct quote reflecting the setup. The guards got really minimal instructions, basically maintain order but no physical violence. That was it. The prisoners, they were just told they'd be arrested and brought to the prison. This total lack of preset guidelines, no instructions for how to behave, is absolutely central to the shocking, rapid descent into cruelty that unfolded. It meant whatever behaviors popped up, they were spontaneous, they came organically from the roles, from the environment they created, not from instructions, not from personality. It was like a blank slate, just inviting whatever the roles themselves conjured up.
And that blank slate, that absence of, specific rules, it led to a truly shocking speed and intensity in how behavior shifted. The guards, almost immediately and apparently without any direct encouragement from the researchers, they started inventing their own punishments. It wasn't long, just days, before their actions escalated way beyond anything you might consider reasonable or ethical or even humane. This terrifying transformation, this embrace of cruelty, it happened in days, not weeks or months. The power dynamics just took hold with frightening speed, like a virus almost.
Yeah, the examples from the experiment are genuinely disturbing. They get recounted time and again in psych text for a reason. They're just so stark. You had prisoners being systematically stripped naked, force exercises, isolation in solitary confinement, which was basically a tiny closet, various forms of degradation. It wasn't just a general sense of abuse, it was specific humiliating acts. Things like sleep deprivation, forcing prisoners to clean toilets with their bare hands, public shaming. It got ugly fast. And there's one particularly harrowing case, prisoner #8612. His real name was Douglas Corpy. He experienced such severe psychological distress after just 36 hours, barely a day and a half, in that he had to be removed. his mental state just deteriorated alarmingly. He started screaming, yelling, showing signs of extreme emotional breakdown, almost like a psychotic episode. This wasn't just, minor discomfort or boredom. This was profound psychological damage happening almost instantly. It just shows how quickly that simulated reality became a deeply traumatic, almost real experience for the participants. It really illustrates the terrifying power of an imposed environment to just warp a person's psyche.
And what's incredibly telling here, and something Zimbardo himself has reflected on a lot, is his own initial entanglement. He wasn't just observing from afar, like a detached scientist. He actually took on the role of the prison superintendent, overseeing the whole thing. And in that role, he got so immersed in the dynamics, so much a part of the drama unfolding, that he failed to intervene effectively, even as he was witnessing the abuse escalating firsthand. He got caught in the very system he was trying to study. A living example of the Lucifer Effect he'd later defined. It forces us to confront this really uncomfortable truth. If he, the brilliant mind behind it all, could fall prey to these forces, what does that say about our own vulnerability?
Precisely. And that self-implication is absolutely crucial. You have to understand that to get the full weight of the experiment, the critical turning point, the thing that finally snapped Zimbardo back to reality, it didn't come from inside the system he'd built. It wasn't some internal realization. It actually took an outsider, his girlfriend at the time, Christina Maslach, who was also a brilliant psychologist. She visited the prison, saw the dehumanizing conditions, the shocking psychological toll on these students, and she just cut through all the academic rationalizations with this simple but incredibly powerful statement: what you're doing to these boys is terrible. That external perspective, right? Unburdened by the role-playing, the immersion, the groupthink, it was absolutely crucial. It brought Zimbardo to his senses and ultimately led to ending the experiment prematurely. After only 6 days, it just showed how vital that outside objective view can be when an entire system and the people in it start normalizing inhumane behavior.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. The Stanford Prison Experiment, cited all the time, debated endlessly. But what does it truly tell us about the power of the situation? About assigned roles versus individual morality. It's not just history, right? It feels like a profound, maybe uncomfortable lesson about human nature.
Oh, the implications are truly profound, far beyond just power corrupts. The SPE really reveals how quickly a fabricated reality can just overwrite our deeply ingrained moral compasses. It's not just that good people do bad things, it's the speed and the intensity of that transformation that suggests this fundamental human susceptibility we often like to deny. Remember, these were bright, stable college students, not people with histories of violence. Yet, that artificial prison environment rapidly became this terrifying, undeniable reality for everyone involved, guards and prisoners. The guards quickly internalized their roles, acted on the power they were given. The prisoners became submissive, distressed, experienced real trauma. It demonstrates that the environment itself, the barrel, as Zimbardo would later call it, can be a more powerful decider of behavior than individual disposition, sometimes overriding personal values, conscience, everything. It forces us to face this uncomfortable truth. Cruelty isn't just the domain of bad people. It can be a chilling product of specific, powerful, often self-reinforcing situations. What really stands out to you about how quickly things went downhill in that controlled environment? And what does that suggest about us, about human nature when things get extreme? It really makes you think how easily a constructed scenario can become this horrifying reality that just reshapes who you are.
Right, that rapid, horrifying descent we were just talking about, that transformation from seemingly normal people into individuals capable of inflicting real harm. That led Zimbardo to coin a specific term for it, the Lucifer Effect. He used this really evocative name to describe this phenomenon, this process of people descending, often without even realizing it, almost against their own will, into cruelty. It's a powerful name, definitely provocative, for what's actually a complex and, frankly, unsettling psychological process.
And it's much more than just a catchy term, Zimbardo actually built this detailed map of how that descent happens, almost like a step-by-step guide to moral erosion. He really emphasized that it doesn't happen all at once, not in one sudden dramatic leap from good to evil, which is kind of how we imagine it, maybe from movies. Instead, it occurs through this series of subtle, incremental steps, a process he described as one small compromise at a time. This idea of gradual slippage is absolutely crucial. It helps us understand how seemingly minor actions can eventually lead to profound moral shifts. It's like a slow, almost imperceptible erosion of your ethical boundaries. Think of water carving a canyon, not a sudden flood, but persistent, consistent pressure. It's rarely this grand, deliberate turn to evil. It's more like a gentle slide down a very slippery slope, where each small compromise just makes the next one that little bit easier.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting, and where Zimbardo's work gives us stuff we can actually use. He didn't just observe this slippage. He meticulously identified 7 specific social processes. Processes that, as he put it, grease the slope to evil. These are the insidious mechanisms by which individuals, you, me, anyone, can become complicit in or even perpetrators of harmful acts. Let's break them down one by one. Because truly understanding these is, I think, key to recognizing them in ourselves, in our workplaces, just out in the world.
Okay, the first one Zimbardo identified is what he called the first small step. This refers to how seemingly minor, almost trivial acts of transgression or compliance can inadvertently pave the way for much bigger moral compromises later on. Imagine being asked to do something that's just a little bit outside your comfort zone, a minor ethical stretch maybe, something you might normally just brush off. But once that small step is taken, once that initial boundary is crossed, it subtly creates this new lower baseline for what feels acceptable. And that initial rationalization, oh, it's not a big deal, or everyone else is doing it, or it's just this once, that isn't just an excuse. It's a powerful cognitive trick. It's cognitive dissonance at work. Your mind feels uncomfortable with the mismatch your values versus your actions, so it works to reduce that discomfort by justifying the action. This effectively recalibrates your moral compass, making the next, maybe slightly worse ethical slide seem less extreme, less morally wrong. It's the thin end of the wedge, really. It opens the door to bigger shifts without the person even realizing the profound impact of that first tiny act.
Right. And the next one is maybe one of the most chilling, dehumanizing the victim. This is the process of stripping away someone's individuality, their inherent humanity, reducing them to just objects or categories or abstract concepts, not complex, feeling deserving people. When you start to see someone as less than, as an animal, an enemy, an other, even just a number, it becomes infinitely easier to hurt them without feeling empathy or guilt or remorse. It's a profound psychological trick, isn't it? An emotional attachment tool that makes cruelty seem okay, even justifiable, in the mind of the person doing it.
You're absolutely right. We saw this starkly, immediately, in the Stanford Prison Experiment. Guards started referring to prisoners only by their assigned numbers, stripping them of their names, their personal stories, their unique identities. And that wasn't just about efficiency. It felt like a deliberate, even if subconscious, act of dehumanization. It eroded the guards' ability to feel empathy. But you see this everywhere, far beyond experiments, connected to the broader picture. Think about history. Entire groups, labeled, stereotyped, presented as less than human, whether it's through racist slurs, religious persecution, political propaganda, or even, the kind of vitriol you see online sometimes. When a whole group is demonized or trivialized, when their suffering is dismissed, it normalizes cruelty against them. It makes widespread atrocities or even just everyday discrimination not just possible, but tragically easy. It lets perpetrators detach themselves from the suffering they're causing by simply denying the victim's inherent worth, their shared humanity. Following that, we have losing your own identity, which psychologists often call de-individuation. This is a powerful state where people feel less personally responsible for what they do because they're wearing a uniform, or they're anonymous think online forums, or they're just absorbed into a larger group identity. When you adopt a specific role, like a guard, a soldier, even a member of a big online mob, that role can start to overshadow your personal moral compass, your individual values. We saw this with terrifying clarity in the Stanford guards. They transformed so rapidly. They quickly embodied those assigned roles, shedding their individual identities as, compassionate students in favor of these harsh, authoritarian guard personas. They felt less like John Smith with his own ethics and more like guard #7, this nameless, faceless enforcer. And that psychological detachment let them act in ways they probably never would have as individuals. The power of the group or the role becomes paramount, effectively dissolving personal responsibility and moral accountability.
And closely related to that, they often seem intertwined, is the fourth process, passing the buck, or diffusion of responsibility. This is that classic, almost reflexive thing, isn't it? Shifting blame or accountability away from yourself, a mental trick to avoid feeling guilty.
Precisely. In situations where bad things happen, people naturally feel less accountable when they perceive responsibility as being spread across a whole group or an impersonal institution or some rigid hierarchy. It's why you hear that chilling phrase so often, "I was just following orders." And that's not just a convenient excuse, it's a genuine psychological phenomenon. The perceived burden of wrongdoing gets literally distributed among many, making each person feel significantly less culpable. If everyone's responsible, then paradoxically, no one feels really responsible. fully responsible. This echoes through history, doesn't it? From the Nuremberg trials to modern corporate scandals. Individuals genuinely believe they were just cogs in a bigger machine, and by believing that, they absolve themselves of moral agency, deferring it to the collective or to someone higher up the chain. It's a powerful escape clause for the conscience. Then the fifth process, often seen as a cornerstone of social psychology, is obeying authority. This gets into the profound influence that authority figures have over us, even when their commands are ethically questionable or clearly wrong. There's this inherent human tendency, it seems, to defer to perceived power, whether that's a boss, a police officer, a political leader, a religious figure, or even, as we saw with Milgram's famous experiments, a scientific researcher in a lab coat. This tendency is deeply ingrained, often instilled from childhood, and it can override our own moral judgment. We're socially conditioned, really, from a very young age to obey authority parents, teachers, law enforcement. And that conditioning can be incredibly hard to resist, especially in high-pressure situations or ambiguous ones or situations filled with fear. The psychological weight of an authority figure can make resistance feel almost impossible. It leads people to act against their own conscience out of a sense of duty or fear of punishment or just that deeply ingrained habit of compliance. This is fundamental to understanding how whole groups can be led into doing terrible things.
Then there's that subtle but immensely powerful force, following the group, conformity. This brings up that potent idea of peer pressure, doesn't it? That deep-seated, almost primal human desire to just fit in, to be accepted by our social group. It's not always overt bullying. Sometimes it's just that quiet pull wanting to belong.
You've hit on a critical point there. There's a strong human inclination to conform to group norms, even when those norms promote unethical or harmful behavior. I mean, think about it. Our social survival for most of human history depended on being accepted by the group. The fear of being ostracized, of being seen as different, being the outcast, the nail that sticks out, that can be incredibly potent, almost a physical discomfort. And this fear can lead people to suppress their own moral objections, to just go along with the crowd, even when their internal compass is screaming, no, yeeter. It's often just easier to go with the flow, do what everyone else is doing, than to stand alone and risk social disapproval or exclusion. And this dynamic can rapidly amplify harmful behaviors within a group. Each person's compliance reinforces the perceived normalcy of the collective action. It creates this dangerous, self-perpetuating feedback loop where bad behavior becomes the unspoken standard. And finally, number 7 is staying silent. Inaction. This one is maybe the most insidious, precisely because it's about what doesn't happen, the absence of action. When people witness wrongdoing but they fail to speak up, or intervene, or challenge the behavior, their inaction, their silence, can be powerfully interpreted as implicit approval, or at the very least, tacit acceptance. This effectively allows the harmful behavior to continue, even intensify. It enables it. If nobody challenges the status quo, if no one says stop or this is wrong, then the negative dynamics are just allowed to fester and normalize. The failure to speak up lets unethical actions become standard practice, just a quiet part of the group's culture. And that contributes significantly to that gradual slippage towards evil we talked about, making it seem less wrong with each passing moment of silence. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most consequential choice is the choice not to act. Inaction itself is a profound form of complicity.
Wow. Okay, so when these 7 steps, these insidious psychological processes, the first small step, dehumanization, de-individuation, diffusion of responsibility, obedience, conformity, and inaction, when they combine, they create this incredibly powerful, often irresistible pathway where cruelty just becomes normalized. It no longer needs direct justification from the person doing it because the system, the group, the authority, maybe even their own rationalizations have made it seem not just acceptable, but perhaps even necessary.
And this isn't just confined to, a psych lab or some historical anomaly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see these exact mechanisms playing out in countless real-world situations, big and small. Zimbardo himself pointed powerfully to the documented abuses at Abu Ghraib prison, which we'll get into more detail on shortly, where almost every single one of these processes was glaringly evident. But think about large-scale corporate fraud, too. Individuals within a company might gradually go along with increasingly unethical practices, passing the buck, obeying authority, conforming to group pressure just to keep their jobs or protect the company's image. Or even look at the aggressive, dehumanizing dynamics in social media mobs. Anonymity fuels de-individuation. Groupthink reinforces conformity. Targets get systematically dehumanized. The anonymity, the groupthink, the dehumanization, it's all there. A chilling testament to how these processes pop up in all sorts of different settings. It gives us a clear roadmap for understanding how seemingly unrelated events can share the same dark psychological roots.
That detailed breakdown, those 7 processes, It really leads us to a critical, maybe even provocative question, one that challenges a lot of our usual thinking about evil. What if the evil isn't inherently in the person? What if it's actually fundamentally in the system itself? This really challenges that comfortable idea that monsters are born, not made. It suggests a far more unsettling truth about our collective vulnerability.
This question, and the answer Zimbardo gives, it really represents his crucial evolution of thought. A pivot that moved him decisively beyond just looking at individual pathology, the idea of a few bad apples spoiling an otherwise good barrel. Instead, he started focusing on systemic influences, on the power of the situation itself, the barrel. And this perspective was absolutely central revolutionary, really, to his role as an expert witness in the Abu Ghraib trials. He wasn't there to excuse the soldiers' abhorrent actions, not at all. His purpose was to explain the profound environmental and situational pressures that could lead otherwise ordinary people to commit such atrocities. His testimony fundamentally shifted the public conversation, didn't it? From just individual blame to a broader, much more uncomfortable look at the context, the barrel, that allowed that behavior to happen.
Yeah, many of us remember vividly the global shock, the outrage ignited by those horrifying photos from Abu Ghraib back in 2004. U.S. soldiers smiling, giving thumbs up next to naked, tortured, humiliated Iraqi prisoners. It was an image that just burned itself into our collective consciousness. And it led many people to immediately label those soldiers as inherently evil, as aberrations, as rotten apples.
But Zimbardo, having seen the Stanford experiment unfold firsthand, he presented this powerful counter-narrative, one that really shifted the conversation, forcing a deeper, more uncomfortable look. He argued forcefully, repeatedly, these weren't monsters, they were ordinary people, placed in an extraordinary toxic environment. That statement directly challenges the easy bad apple theory, right? The theory that says only a few rogue individuals are responsible, which lets the rest of us off the hook, lets us distance ourselves. Instead, Zimbardo insisted that the environment, the specific conditions of that prison, the immense stress, the lack of oversight, the absence of clear ethical guidelines, those were the primary drivers. He drew that powerful, now famous analogy to hammer his point home. He stated unequivocally, the barrel was bad, not just the apples. And he elaborated on what that bad barrel at Abu Ghraib involved. A whole host of deeply problematic systemic failures, things like chronic sleep deprivation for the guards, immense and sustained psychological stress from constant threat, ambiguous, often conflicting orders from higher-ups. A profound lack of clear rules for handling prisoners, and crucially, an almost complete absence of effective oversight and accountability from superiors. Plus, there is this atmosphere of dehumanizing the prisoners and explicit or implicit pressure to soften them up for interrogation, which then just escalated into abuse without any checks. These factors all combined to create this crucible where ethical boundaries just dissolved with terrifying speed. It turned otherwise normal people into perpetrators of unimaginable acts. Not because they were inherently depraved, but because of the powerful corrupting influence of the system itself. So if we analyze these systemic vulnerabilities, what specific conditions within any system, military, prison, corporation, even a local sports team, make it prone to fostering unethical, harmful behavior? Zimbardo's work points to several key factors. We're talking about things like unquestioned authority, where orders are followed blindly without critical thought, and where dissent is actively discouraged or even punished. Also, a profound lack of oversight, meaning no checks and balances, no accountability mechanisms, no independent eyes to prevent abuses from starting or escalating. And crucially, it's about systems that actively encourage blind obedience, systems that don't foster critical thinking or provide safe spaces for individuals to voice moral objections. When these elements combine, they create a perfect storm. A dangerous crucible where ethical lines blur and harmful behaviors can rapidly become the norm, even for people who would normally consider themselves good, moral individuals.
So what does all this mean for us? For you, listening right now, in our own environments, whether that's work or our communities, or even the vast online spaces we hang out in every day. If Zimbardo's barrel can be bad, how do we spot it? And maybe more importantly, what then?
Well, the broader implications are, frankly, chillingly clear, but also, I think, incredibly empowering. When these systemic flaws, unquestioned authority, lack of oversight, blind obedience, no avenues for ethical concern when they're present, every individual, regardless of how inherently good or morally strong they think they are, becomes vulnerable. Vulnerable to acting in ways they might never have imagined. It's not about trying to find the right kind of people to put into a broken system. It's about recognizing that the system itself needs fixing. And understanding this isn't an excuse for bad behavior. It's a critical, absolutely essential step in prevention. It profoundly suddenly shifts our focus, doesn't it? From just punishing individuals after the fact to reforming the environments and structures that enable such behavior in the first place. It tells us we have to be vigilant, not just about individual actions, but about the pervasive structures and cultures where those actions take place. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to examine the underlying systemic issues that can subtly yet powerfully turn good people bad.
Now, after discussing Stanford, the 7 processes, the bad barrel of Abu Ghraib, this might all sound incredibly bleak, right? The Lucifer Effect definitely paints a stark picture, maybe even a grim one, about how susceptible we are to these powerful situational forces. But Zimbardo's work is emphatically not meant to be just a bleak diagnosis of human nature, not some fatalistic message that we're all doomed to fall. Far from it. Instead, it really serves as this compelling, urgent call to action. It gives us the awareness, the knowledge, the map we need to actively resist the very forces that lead to cruelty and dehumanization. It's about being armed with understanding, rather than being left vulnerable because we're ignorant.
Precisely. Zimbardo didn't just leave us there, wallowing in the darkness of human fallibility and situational power. He ended his huge work with this profound, almost hopeful challenge: how do we teach heroism? And that transforms the book, doesn't it? From just a cautionary tale into a practical, actionable guide for positive change. It pushes us to think about how we can actively cultivate the opposite of the Lucifer Effect, the courage to act ethically, to stand up, to intervene, even when we're facing immense pressure. It shifts the focus from just explaining evil to actually inspiring good. And this isn't about the cinematic kind of heroism, capes and superpowers, big dramatic acts of self-sacrifice that make headlines. It's about something much more attainable, much more pervasive, and arguably far more impactful in our daily lives, everyday resistance. It's about those quiet, often uncelebrated acts of moral courage that happen in mundane settings, those small, seemingly insignificant choices that, when added up, collectively make a huge difference in shaping culture and preventing that downward slide. It's the heroism of the ordinary person.
That's the kind of heroism that just says no when the group says yes. It's a simple act of defiance. Maybe a quiet refusal to comply, but Zimbardo portrays it as a crucial form of heroism. It's the strength to hold on to your moral compass, your personal integrity, your commitment to doing the right thing, when maybe everyone else around you is losing theirs, when that current of conformity is pulling really hard.
And to put these profound ideas into practice, Zimbardo didn't just write a book and leave it at that. He launched a tangible initiative, the Heroic Imagination Project, or HIP. It's described as a global nonprofit, which really shows his commitment to moving from theory to real-world application, to actually trying to make a difference. The core mission of HIP is fundamentally preventative. It's about teaching people, students, soldiers, community leaders, just everyday individuals, how to proactively recognize and navigate these toxic dynamics before they take root. This means equipping people with the tools to spot those social processes we talked about earlier, the creeping first steps, the dehumanization, the diffusion of responsibility, the pressure to conform, the insidious silence. It's about empowering people to see these forces at play within themselves, within their groups, within their environments, often before they even register consciously. And critically, it's about developing that inner strength, that moral courage to act against those forces, to intervene, to speak up, to be the outlier, the dissenter when it's necessary. It's about cultivating what Zimbardo calls preemptive ethics, basically building resilience right into the individual's psyche. So if we think about the fundamental strategy for preventing this descent into cruelty, for building a better barrel, it really boils down to planting seeds of awareness. This means actively cultivating knowledge and critical thinking before a destructive role becomes someone's identity, before the situation has fully captured their mind and will. It's about fostering environments that actively encourage questioning, environments that don't just tolerate, but maybe even celebrate healthy dissent and critical thought, and environments that fundamentally emphasize personal responsibility and accountability, even within a group. It's about designing systems that promote transparency, that provide clear channels for ethical concerns to be raised and addressed without fear of reprisal, and that actively promote accountability at every level. Understanding those 7 social processes isn't just some academic exercise. It's a vital, empowering tool. It gives you a language, a framework to understand what's happening in real time inside you or around you, enabling you to make different, more ethical choices. That understanding, that awareness, it's truly the first and most crucial step toward resistance, towards being an everyday hero.
And that's where you, listening right now, come in. The profound lessons from the Lucifer Effect aren't just for discussion or history class. They're actionable. They're deeply personal. How can you apply these lessons? In your own life, your workplace, your community, your online interactions, how can you help foster environments where ethical behavior isn't just expected, but it's the unshakable norm? Where critical thinking is valued, and where everyday heroism, those small, quiet acts of courage, isn't just possible, but it's celebrated, it's reinforced. It really is about building better barrels, isn't it? Not just hoping we get lucky with good apples. Hashtag outro. So let's bring this deep dive full circle. Back to that profound, intensely personal question we started with right at the top. Could you become a villain? Could I? Science, through Zimbardo's meticulous, often uncomfortable work, suggests a resounding, maybe uncomfortable yes. The power of the situation, the influence of the barrel, it's undeniable.
But here's the crucial counterpoint. The element that transcends that deterministic pull of the situation. The glimmer of agency we have, even in the face of overwhelming pressure. It's called choice. Even when the pressure is immense, even when the system is flawed, even when that psychological current is pulling you relentlessly toward conformity, the capacity for individual agency, for conscious decision-making, it remains. And that's really the core takeaway we want to leave you with today. The ultimate power truly lies in individual agency. When we learn to notice the pressure, when we develop the awareness to identify those insidious 7 social processes at play, when we make the conscious, often difficult decision to speak up instead of going along, when we choose to actively resist, we have the power to make a different kind of history. We can choose to be the exception that proves the rule, the moral beacon, the quiet resistor in a challenging environment. It's about actively cultivating that heroic imagination within each of us.
So as you go about your week, we really encourage you to reflect deeply on the hidden pressures that might be subtly influencing behavior around you, or perhaps even your own. Consider how actively cultivating that awareness, that critical thinking, and making conscious choices, especially those small, consistent acts of everyday resistance, can be the most profound and impactful act of heroism in a world filled with complex barrels. What choice will you make when faced with those pressures?